This is a reading from the Diary of Jesus by Jean Aulagnier. Chapter 7, A.D. 30, the year of Jesus' Passion and Resurrection. Jesus prepares for his Passion. January 22nd, Tuesday. The streets of Bethany were nearly deserted when a group of approximately 20 Jews from the Sanhedrin rode into town. There were scribes, Pharisees, a few Sadducees, and even a Herodian, who was a former lover of Mary of Magdala. Some people came out of their homes to see who they were. The group rode by, aloof and haughty, on their way to Lazarus' house. The crowd made hostile comments behind their backs. John chapter 11, verse 1b. Lazarus of Bethany had fallen sick. He was growing worse every day. His sister Martha, as the rules of hospitality dictated, very courteously greeted the haughty group. They were disgusting. All they were interested in was tracking down Jesus. They thought they could obtain some information about Jesus if they visited the two sisters who kept vigil over their dying brother. Martha, because of her grief, might have fallen for their trap. Mary, insulted by the Herodian, faced all of them. She flared up in anger and like a fiery angel threw them all out. 2 days went by. January 24th, Thursday. A Roman doctor admitted to the sisters that he could no longer do anything for Lazarus. The master is the only one who can save him, he told them, as they walked with him to the gate. This doctor respected the Lord, but you have to hurry. Lazarus will only live for at most 3 sunsets. After he left, Martha pleaded with Mary for a long time that they should send for Jesus. Mary did not yield. Jesus had told them to send for him only after Lazarus' death. She did not want to disobey him for any reason. After this long and painful discussion, Martha secretly sent a servant to Jesus. She told him to ride his horse to death if need be. She also told him to go on even after nightfall, since the moon was in its first quarter. Now Jesus was still on the other side of the Jordan River. Jesus was at Solomon's village, some 30 miles from Bethany. The hours went by. Martha's servant arrived in the evening as it was getting dark. After Peter gave the servant what he needed, he immediately saw Jesus. He said to him, John chapter 11, verse 3b, Lord, the one you love is ill. The servant went on to say, I was asked to tell you, come, because you alone can heal him. Jesus replied, tell them to remain in peace. John chapter 11, verse 4b. The end of this sickness is not death. It is meant for God's glory, to bring honor to the Son of God. At this, Jesus sent the servant back. January 24th and 25th. Meanwhile, Lazarus was still breathing. Martha, Mary, Maximin, Marcella, and Naomi were at his bedside. They attended him throughout his long agony. They wiped his face, moistened his lips, applied warm bricks to his chilled feet. The doors and windows were wide open so that he could breathe more easily. He agonized for a long time. The Roman doctor returned and eased his death to the best of his ability. As Lazarus grew delirious, it became painful to listen to him. He poured out the anguish he had felt when his sister Mary had plunged them all into despair and sent their mother to her tomb. Lazarus died some time after midnight. January 25th, Friday. Martha and Mary and the servants kept watch over Lazarus until dawn. The servant returned with Jesus' message. Tell the sisters that I will come. Let them hope. The end of Lazarus' sickness is not death. God has allowed it so that his power might be glorified in his Son. Alas, Martha would not believe this. She had dreadful doubts. She rebuked Mary sharply for not wanting to disobey Jesus and send for him. Mary, though worn out, was the only one who did not say a thing against Jesus. Since Lazarus had died from generalized gangrene, it became urgent that they bury him immediately. Lazarus had just died, and already he smelled extremely foul. Even embalming failed to cover up the stench. The funeral was set for that very day. Lazarus was buried just before the Sabbath began at sunset. There was a huge crowd in Bethany. The servants, curious onlookers, and the whole Sanhedrin were present. There were Judeans of distinction, Pharisees, Sadducees, and groups of scribes. Some were compassionate, like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Others overflowed with insults, like old Cananiah and Doras. These two gladly pointed out to the grieving sisters that it was rather incomprehensible that only one person should be missing, Jesus. Jesus did not come, and the heavy stone was rolled over to shut in his friend's corpse. Of course, Cananiah and Doris gleefully pounced on Jesus' absence, saying that he was an impostor. 2 days went by. January 27th, Sunday. Jesus and his apostles had an exhausting day. This was always the case on the day following the Sabbath, when they received many people. They had a lively conversation during supper. Then Jesus said, John chapter 11, verse 7b, "Let us go back to Judea." "Rabbi," his disciples said to him, "the Jews were threatening to stone you recently, and you go there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not just 12 hours of daylight? A man can walk in the daytime without stumbling because he can see by the world's light. He only stumbles if he walks by night, because then the light cannot reach him." After saying that, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus is at rest now. I am going there to wake him." "But Lord," the disciples said to him, "if he is rested, his life will be saved." Jesus had been telling them of his death, but they thought he meant the rest which comes with sleep. So now Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I am glad I was not there. It would help you to believe. It will help you to believe. But come, let us make our way to him." At this, Thomas, who is also called Didymus, a nickname which means the twin, verse 16b, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go too and be killed along with him." Jesus and the others kindly reproved him. Thomas did not yet understand that no matter how many clouds there were, the blue sky of the eternal heaven was always there. Then Jesus said they would leave the following day, and he told them what to do until then. Jesus then retired, and the apostles shared their astonishment, their faith, and their hope with one another. January 28th, Monday. They left Solomon's house at about noon. They crossed the Jordan River and spent that night at Veronica's home near Jericho. January 29th, Tuesday. At dawn, they finally headed towards Bethany. They reached the outskirts of Bethany shortly before noon. The little town was peaceful, but a number of Jewish chief priests had been going every day to Lazarus' home. They had been behaving haughtily in the sisters' garden. A boy informed Jesus of their behavior. Jesus and his apostles walked around the outskirts of Bethany and arrived directly at the garden gate. A Jew saw Jesus. The news that he was at the gate spread like wildfire. John chapter 11, verse 19. Many of the Jews had gone out there to comfort Martha and Mary over the loss of their brother. Some secret disciples and benevolent Jews were among them: Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, John the priest, Eleazar, John the scribe, Gamaliel and his son, Manaen, Cusa, and Barnabas, the disciple of Gamaliel. Footnote 2. See Friday, August 17th of AD 29 on page 201. They were so surprised to see Jesus that they remained speechless. No one even thought of greeting Jesus, and he did not greet anyone either. John chapter 11, verse 20. Martha, when she heard that Jesus had come, went out to meet him, while Mary sat at home. She threw herself at his feet and overflowed with grief, with an involuntary tone of rebuke. John chapter 11, 21b. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. He loved you so much. You know how much we loved him. We expected everything from you." Gamaliel stood close by with his arms folded. He stared at Jesus. Martha went on. John chapter 11, verse 22. "But I know well that even now God will grant whatever you ask of him." "Your brother," Jesus said to her, "will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he shall rise again at the resurrection when the last day comes." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and life. He who believes in me, though he is dead, will live on. And everyone who lives and believes in me will not die forever." Do you believe this? Jesus uttered the last words in a resonant voice. John chapter 11, verse 27. Yes, Lord, she told him, I have learned to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the one whose coming has been expected by the world. And with that, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The Master is here, she said, and is asking for you. She rose up at once on hearing this and went to him. Jesus had not yet reached the village. He was still at the place where Martha had gone out to meet him. Footnote 3. Jesus had walked around the village and entered directly into Lazarus' property. All this took place in Lazarus' garden. And so the Jews who were in the house with Mary, comforting her, when they saw how quickly she rose up and went out, followed her. She has gone to the grave, they said, to weep there. So Mary reached the place where Jesus was, and when she saw him, she fell at his feet. Lord, she said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Why did you do that, Jesus? She also said, but without a trace of rebuke in her voice. John chapter 11, verse 33. Jesus, when he saw her in tears, and the tears of the Jews who accompanied her, sighed deeply and distressed himself over it. Where have you buried him? He asked. Lord, they said to him, come and see. So they went to the tomb, and at the far end of the orchard, they stopped in front of the stone that had been rolled over the skew opening of the tomb. John chapter 11, verse 35. Then Jesus wept. See, the Jews said, how he loved them. But some said, he opened the eyes of the man born blind. Could he not have prevented this man's death? So Jesus, once more, sighing to himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone had been put over the mouth of it. Jesus told them, take away the stone. They were absolutely dumbfounded. Jesus had to repeat his order, since no one dared to move. Then, John chapter 11, verse 39b, Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, Lord, by this time he stinks. He's been dead for 4 days. Why, Jesus said to her, have I not told you that if you believe, you will see God glorified? Take away the stone, I say. So they took the stone away. The stench was so bad, they all backed away. John chapter 11, verse 41b. Jesus lifted up his eyes to heaven. Father, he said, I thank you for hearing my prayer. For myself, I know that you always hear me, but I say this for the sake of the people standing here, that they may believe it is you who have sent me. Jesus continued to pray silently. A soft light came out of Jesus and hung about him. He was in ecstasy, with his face turned upwards, contemplating the Father. John chapter 11, verse 43. And with that he cried in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out to my side. The dead man slowly appeared in the sight of all. He was still wrapped up in strips of linen, and as he walked out, Jesus slowly backed up with his arms stretched out. John chapter 11, verse 44a. And the dead man came out, his feet and hands tied with linen strips, and his face muffled in a veil. Everyone cried out, Oh! Then Jesus shouted loudly. John chapter 11, 44c. Loose him and let him go free. Bring him clothes and food. Thus Jesus gave the Pharisees a sign one of them had haughtily demanded of him in Kadesh, that he raise a rotting dead body back to life. Footnote. See February 6th, A.D. 29, page 157, editor. This was the Lord's greatest triumph until his own passion and resurrection. John chapter 11, verse 45. Many of these Jews who had visited Martha and Mary and seen what Jesus did came to believe in him. Barnabas was one of them. John chapter 11, verse 46a. But some of them, Zadok, Hilkiah, Felix, Doris the son, and Cananiah the Galilean, remained totally blind and deaf and refused to accept the evidence. As Jesus said, they remained shut in the rottenness of their hearts. They flew into a deep rage and, John chapter 11, verse 46b, went off to the other Pharisees who were not in Bethany. John chapter 11, verse 46c, and reported to them all Jesus had done. The news spread like lightning throughout Jerusalem and Judea. At that very moment, Herod and Herodias were in Jerusalem, paying their respects to Pilate. When they heard about it, Herod was terrified, and Herodias flew into a great rage. As for Pilate, he thought it was interesting enough to immediately inform his wife Claudia. He sent a messenger to Caesarea immediately after sunset. John chapter 11, verse 47. The chief priests and Pharisees summoned a council. "What are we going to do?" they said. "This man is performing many miracles. If we leave him to his own devices, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and make an end of our city and our nation." After this there was a long controversy. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea defended Jesus. Gamaliel himself considered Jesus as the greatest rabbi of Israel. This greatly astonished Jesus' relentless enemies: Eleazar the son of Annas, Doris, Zadok, Cananiah, Hilkiah, and at their head Caiaphas, the high priest. These men put up a violent counterattack. They recommended false witnesses or anything at all to destroy Jesus. Finally, the most excited among them followed Eleazar's suggestion and went to see Pilate. They alleged that Jesus was dangerous to Caesar in the hope of inducing the Roman procurator to intervene. Pilate forced them to wait for a long time and made several scornful gestures at them to show them how little he thought of them. He also told them that he respected the Nazarene. At this, he had his soldiers throw them out. Infuriated, they returned to the Sanhedrin. Meanwhile, several members had left, tired of waiting for them. Caiaphas was more exasperated than all of them. Due to Jesus' resurrection of Lazarus, Caiaphas declared to the remaining crowd that Jesus had to die. He said, John chapter 11, verse 49b, "You have no perception at all. You do not reflect that it is best for us if one man is put to death for the sake of the people, to save a whole nation from destruction." But he did not say this of his own impulse. Since he was the high priest in that year, he prophesied that Jesus was to die for the sake of the nation, and not only for that nation's sake, but so as to bring together into one all God's children, scattered far and wide. From that day forward, then, they plotted his death. Someone objected to this plot against Jesus. Caiaphas replied, "I have spoken. The Spirit of the Lord rests upon me, the high priest. I decree that anyone who knows the whereabouts of the Nazarene must report it to us." He then announced that the Sanhedrin would be summoned again on the following Friday, and the meeting was adjourned. February the 1st, Friday. As planned, the Sanhedrin met from 9 a.m. until noon. It decided to proclaim in all the synagogues that Jesus was a wanted man. This is how Jesus learned about this. As Jesus was talking with Lazarus and Mary in the afternoon, a boy ran up to him with a message. The message said that Joseph the elder, that is, Joseph of Arimathea, urgently wished to see him at Bethphage. This was between Bethany and Jerusalem. Jesus went, and Joseph told him about the emergency. Jesus immediately walked over to Simon the Zealot's house, where the apostles were gathered. But Jesus did not tell his apostles that he was wanted. Lazarus put 2 carriages at his disposal, and Jesus and his apostles rode to Jericho for the night. February 2nd, Saturday. They left Jericho at about 11 a.m. They began walking on back roads and deliberately went a little further than what was allowed on a Sabbath. Footnote 5. This was a case of absolute necessity. Those who sinned, Jesus said afterwards, are those who forced us to run away. This is when Jesus told them that he was officially wanted by the Sanhedrin, so that they were at risk staying with him. None of them wanted to abandon him. Even Judas was firm in his resolve, believing that the Sanhedrin could do nothing. Only the Romans could harm Jesus, Judas thought, but they had nothing against Jesus. After sunset, they arrived at an isolated house situated on the way to Ephraim, and spent the night there. This was near a little bridge that spanned the torrent which ran down from Ephraim to the Jordan. February 3rd, Sunday. At dawn, Jesus told his apostles that they would stay in his house for a while. It was on the border of Judea and Samaria, and the chief priests and their agents would not venture out there. Then he would return to Jerusalem with his apostles for the Passover. Thus John wrote in his Gospel, John chapter 11, verse 54, Jesus no longer went about openly among the Jews, but retired to a city called Ephraim in the country, which borders on the desert, and he waited there with his disciples. After this, Jesus sent 10 of his apostles to preach in the Decapolis for the week. He kept John and Judas with him. February 8th, Friday. When the apostles returned, Jesus was away. He came back after sunset. He was tired but happy. He had been able to recover 3 children from some sheep robbers. The children were 3 to 7 years old and had just been orphaned. They had not seen some of their relatives for a long time, and Jesus had asked the robbers to tell the relatives to come and get the children. The robbers promised they would. Judas was caustic as ever. He did not trust the robbers, and he did not think Jesus should have walked after the sunset because of the Sabbath. Jesus replied that, however great the law of the Sabbath, the precept of love is much greater. February 9th, Saturday. They spent the Sabbath by the stream. Jesus tirelessly reminded his apostles, especially Judas, that it was necessary to renew their hearts. They had to abandon themselves to love and trust God. February 10th, Sunday. Long before dawn, Jesus spent some time by himself with Peter. He said that men were listening more and more to the devil. He explained in detail to him how men's sins cause suffering for others on earth. Men's sins transform the earth. It used to be an immense altar of praise to God, but now it was a squalid temple dedicated to all idols. He, the Son of the Father, was going to bring redemption by his immolation. From then on, God would only accept innocent or voluntary sacrifices performed with love. That is, God would only accept men and women who offer themselves to him because they love him, and love would respond to the suffering of innocent children with yet greater love. February 16th, Saturday. Jesus and his apostles were invited to the Samaritan synagogue in Ephraim. This displeased Judas very much, as he was more prejudiced than ever. Jesus said that all races are equal. He brought to light the only temple that really matters. This is the one that the Son establishes by his love, in the Father's name, into the hearts of believers. February 17th or 18th. Jesus remained in Ephraim with John and Judas, and the other apostles were off evangelizing in Samaria and the Decapolis. Some people from Shechem came over to Ephraim. They brought along the relatives of the children Jesus had been sheltering for about 10 days. The robbers had kept their word, and Jesus pointed it out to Judas. Jesus welcomed the relatives. February 18th or 19th. Jesus walked part of the way to Shechem with the people. In this way, the long-lost children would not be upset by too brutal a parting with Jesus. Jesus also told the people that he would do something exceedingly great when the moon of Nisan is full. Then they went their way, and Jesus backtracked so as to be home before evening. While John regularly helped the old Samaritan woman who sheltered them, Judas was grumbling and straining to go. As for Jesus, he spent more and more time by himself, communing with the Father. Thus, he was preparing himself for his passion. February 20th, Wednesday. Manaen arrived at night in the utmost of secrecy. He surveyed the area and waited until dawn to speak with Jesus in private. He had been sent by Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, who were both on their way to see the Master. Manaen informed Jesus that the 2 secret disciples would wait for him at the beginning of the Sabbath in a remote spot near Gophna. February 22nd, Friday. Jesus left his refuge around noon. He told Judas and John not to expect him until dawn on the first day of the week. Manaen did not show himself to the others, but to Jesus alone. He showed him the way to meet Nicodemus, who had come from Ramah, and Joseph from Arimathea. They arrived shortly after sunset. The 2 Jews wanted to warn Jesus. Someone must have betrayed his secret refuge, since the Sanhedrin knew about it. Jesus did not become excited. He simply said that his disciples would come to him if they were not afraid of retaliation by the Sanhedrin and Herodias. The 2 men also reported that one of Lazarus' servants came from Nazareth. He said that the Virgin Mary, her sister-in-law, and Johanna would meet Jesus a couple of weeks later at the end of the present moon. Jesus once more revealed to the 3 of them his immediate future. He announced that he would go to Jerusalem for the Passover, for the Lamb of salvation can be slain only on the Passover of unleavened bread. That greatly worried them. February 23rd, Saturday. The two Jews left at dawn. Joseph headed for the nearby village of Gophna, where he had left his mount. Nicodemus walked to Beeroth and would wait for the end of the Sabbath before returning to Ramah. Nonetheless, both men had to bend the sabbatical rule about travel. Manaen humorously pointed out to Jesus that they would feel at peace again when they sacrificed an animal to God, since they were good Jews. Manaen spent the day with Jesus. After sunset, he rode his horse to Jericho, since that is where Herod Antipas was staying at the time. Jesus remained by himself. A man arrived unexpectedly in the evening. His name was Samuel. He was the favorite disciple of Pharisee Jonathan ben Uziel, one of Jesus' bitterest enemies. Samuel was dripping wet. He had been caught in a mudslide, then in the rain, and had lost his purse. Jesus welcomed him and comforted him, even though he knew that Samuel was a disciple of his enemy. Gradually, Jesus made Samuel realize that he was a puppet in the hands of the Sanhedrin. Samuel was moved. He became a disciple of Jesus. Jesus then told Samuel that Judas was the betrayer of Christ, sold out to the Sanhedrin. Samuel was astonished and could not refrain from exclaiming, "Divine mercy, you know even that?" February 24th, Sunday. At dawn, Jesus brought Samuel to the house where he was staying. The apostles were still there, since Peter did not want to leave for another week before Jesus' return. February 25th, Monday. After this, the 10 left on their mission. Samuel remained with Jesus, John, and Judas. Now, Claudia Procula, Pontius Pilate's wife, did not care what people might think. She went over to see Jesus, since she too was aware that he was an Ephraim. Even this woman, who admired Jesus, though, was not immune from the poison of Jesus' enemies. These Jews had made her wonder whether Jesus might have lost all his power because of sin. That would explain why he had withdrawn by himself. Jesus replied immediately with a miracle. He gave the power of speech to Claudia's mute, black slave. Claudia asked for Jesus' forgiveness and left. February 25th to March 1st. Days went by. At this time of the year, the plants were growing rapidly. Jesus spent a great deal of time praying. March the 1st, Friday. Jesus came across a man who was nearly dying of hunger. He was a sick man from Yamnia, who had spent several weeks searching for Jesus. He had walked to Nazareth, then to Jerusalem. Jesus fed him, healed him, and took him home. Jesus asked Judas to care for him until he had recovered. After this, Jesus went to one of his favorite prayer spots. He found Samuel there. Samuel was grieving on account of Judas's wickedness and base insinuations. Then Sabbath began as usual, with the arrival of the other apostles. March 3rd, Sunday. Samuel left with the apostles, and Jesus sent the man from Yamnia on a mission to Jericho. His mission was to get Veronica, the faithful disciple. March 9th, approximately. Veronica arrived with Eliza. The household was very restless, because the Virgin Mary, Johanna, and Mary of Clopas had been expected to arrive before the Sabbath. Lazarus had sent a group of disciples to tell Jesus that they were coming by carriage with him. Lazarus was on his way back from Antioch of Syria. Footnote 6. Lazarus traveled as far as Syria to witness to Jesus' power, who had raised him from the dead. At last, a caravan of carriages came in from Tiberias, Cana, Nazareth, Endor, and Naim. Susanna and Mary Salome came along with the 3 women, and many Samaritans too. Little by little, as the people began to talk among themselves, the apostles discovered that Jesus had forbidden a number of his followers from going to Jerusalem for the Passover. This was the case for Margim and Judas's mother. Peter was growing increasingly worried about all of this. He asked Lazarus to go over to Pilate and question him about the matter. Let us remember that Lazarus was in favor with Rome. Jesus reminded Peter and Lazarus that this would be in vain, because Pilate was weak-willed, like a reed bending in the wind. Jesus sent away the travelers who had come from afar. He asked his disciples to go off in different directions. They were to gather together his followers in Jericho for the new moon of Nisan, March 23rd of that year. Finally, Jesus took Lazarus aside. Jesus was worried about Lazarus' sister Mary, who was quite despondent. Jesus asked the friend he had raised back to life to send for his sisters. March 10th, approximately. At dawn, Lazarus left for Bethany. He would travel through Bethel and Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the women repaired the men's clothing, since Jesus and the apostles had not repaired their clothing properly for months. A few days went by. March 14th, Thursday. A terrible scene took place in the house. Jesus and John discovered Judas filling his purse with coins from a chest he had pried open. Footnote 7. The chest belonged to Johanna. Jesus stopped himself just in time before cursing Judas. Then Judas flew into an uncontrollable rage. He revealed that he hated Jesus. Jesus had been Judas's hero. Now Judas believed that Jesus was merely a man on the road to destruction. While Judas spoke, Jesus prayed. Then Jesus talked to Judas for a long time. Judas became very perturbed. Jesus was unable, however, to convince Judas even to say as little as, "Lord, save me." Jesus left Judas to his destiny. Jesus was extremely anguished over his apostle who was enslaved by the devil. No one else was in the house at that time.